Trauma. Everyone has it. No one talks about it. It seems easier to stay silent, ignore it, or stuff it than it does to honor it, learn from it, and finally heal. Trauma is debilitating, yet so often we suffer in silence. Trauma is not meant to be battled alone, and we are no longer going to suffer in silence. Together, we are creating a safe place to speak, to share our stories and grow our strength as we heal. Together, we are giving a voice to those who have been silenced, bringing darkness into light and letting God use our stories. Today, we find ourselves again. We relight our spark and let it light up the world. Stop SIS is a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating on issues of trauma and trafficking, as well as the amazing power of the healing journey. Welcome to Stop SIS. Hey, you guys. Welcome back to Stop SIS, Stop Suffering in Silence. My name is Denise Walsh, and I am here with my friend Rachel Timothy. I just got back from a spring break vacation, and so I want to give Rachel a round of applause for hosting the podcast last week on her own. If you haven't listened to it, it's a powerful episode about righteous anger and the power of what we can, like the positive things we can do with these emotions that get stirred up. So definitely take a listen to that. I was, on vacation doing adventure stuff, and now I need a nap. So Rachel, what have you been up to?
Oh, girl. Yeah, when I saw all that you were posting and the things you were doing, I was like, oh, that looks exhausting.
Yeah, I was like, this is what 40 feels like. Now I'm tired.
But the memories, I bet, were amazing. The boys will not forget that.
Well, that's the thing. We've got like a season, right? Where just a handful of years where they still like us. They still like hold our hand as we walk down the street. But yet they can do stuff and stay up till 10 and not take naps. And so we're utilizing it.
Oh, for sure. I literally just got done with PT this morning, physical therapy for my knee. And the lady and I were talking about our kids and stuff. And I had never heard this described this way before, but it was so true. She said, our kids are basically our heart living outside of our body, and we have no control over what happens to it. But you're right. Like, you have this season of time to take care of it.
Yeah.
Nurture it. Yeah.
I know. I can imagine the vulnerability as they start to get older and driving and at places. I mean, goodness, parenting is something they should teach in school.
For sure.
We're always like, how come they don't teach us in school? What do they teach us in school? Jeez, oh, Pete, nothing helpful, that's for sure. But today's podcast is a really interesting one because it combines kind of the childhood experience with the adult experience. And I know you were listening to a podcast and they were talking about symptoms that adults experience who most likely have had a childhood trauma. Like, there's these common denominators. If you've had childhood trauma, you most likely experience these things as an adult.
Yes.
And I know you were saying, like, when you were listening, you're like, oh, that's me. Oh, that's me. Oh, that's me. So do you want to share a bit about that podcast you were listening to, and then we can dive into it?
Yeah. So Patrick Teahan, Teahan, is the guy that kind of came up with this, and he is a licensed clinical social worker, I believe. But what he was saying was it's like oddly specific. And it's really funny because he was going through the list and I was truly just listening at first. But then once he got to about number 4, I was like, okay, I'm going to need to go back and start writing these down because yes, I'm guessing the next 6 I will also be. But by the time, like, I was almost laughing listening to this at how specific it was to my life. And then number 7 is actually laughing about the pain. And I was like, there you go. I'm laughing about my symptoms. And then he's like, and if you are laughing, that could be a symptom. as well. So it was just really interesting to me. And I felt like it could be beneficial for anybody, whether you've had trauma or you are in a relationship with somebody who has trauma and you're working with somebody who has trauma. Because some of these, I would imagine, could be annoying to other people.
Okay.
And, and it's really a catch-22 because it probably is somewhat annoying, but then in the same sense, the survivor picks up on the fact that this isn't normal thoughts. And so then your confidence and your self-worth go down. This is just who I am. This is who I've become. And it's a terrible spiral.
So why is it helpful for the survivor to recognize that this is actually linked to the trauma? This is a survival mechanism, essentially, or born from the trauma. Why is that helpful for a survivor to learn that?
Because it's not me. It is what was done to me that leads to these reactions.
Okay.
And that I can change.
Okay.
So
it's empowering a little bit to know this isn't just who I am. This is actually a response that I can shift.
Exactly. And I think knowledge is power. And sometimes seeing it written down or seeing it, like hearing it said to you, it could be something that you have not recognized as a pattern in your life until you hear it and you're like, oh yeah, okay, that's me. Now, the next time I'm in a similar situation, I might pause and think, okay, what would my 37-year-old self do in this situation versus that 9-year-old who's traumatized, and maybe have a different response.
Yeah, that is powerful. And it's empowering to say, this isn't just I'm not a victim to these symptoms. I actually can shift them.
Yeah. And there's no judgment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's start talking about them. We're going to go through them one by one and give some examples. The first one is emotional delay. So basically, the impact of the situation doesn't fully hit until later. You recognize that manipulation, rude comments, or gaslighting hours or days later. So maybe if you're in a domestic violence situation or you have a grooming situation, you don't quite even realize it. Maybe you're stoic or calm in the moment, but then later fall apart.
Yes. I can give you a perfect example. Back in 2020 actually, sorry, we had to up and move fairly quickly, and we had no place to move to. Mind you, none of that I handled well, stoic or calm in any way, shape, or form. But we got moved into we moved in with a family that we had never met before. And when we did, like over the course of time, I started to pick up some signs about the husband that was living there. And then about 2.5 months in, there was a raid on the house when me and my daughter were there. And police stormed the house. Turns out this man was producing and distributing child porn. We all of a sudden, have nowhere to live. My kids are in school. I need to pick them up in 2 hours, and we don't even know where we're going to sleep tonight. I mean, it was just chaos. And I was calm. I was okay. I wasn't okay, but I was weirdly handling it okay. And it was one of those, what are the chances? You're getting away from this terrible situation and you end up in the house of a pedophile. It was a terrible situation. And I remember Granny on the phone with me, wow, you're really handling this well. Yeah. 2 days later, I was a mess. It all caught up with me, and I was scared and I was worried, and I was, I just lost it. I spiraled, and it was days after the fact. And at that point, everybody else was doing better. They had already worked through it. And now I'm falling apart, and it really didn't make sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. So in the midst of the situation, you're experiencing the fight or flight.
Oh, yeah.
And then when you get out of the situation and you start to relax, it starts to come back, perhaps.
Yeah. And so you're experiencing what everybody else already did in the panic of the moment.
Right. So how would somebody recognize if this is something they deal with?
Well, I guess it's interesting because I I don't know. In the moment, the calmness can be a very good thing.
Yeah, that was helpful.
Yeah. I guess recognizing the fact days later when you're spiraling, that could be, oh, okay, I'm feeling it in this moment. There's no reason to shame myself. Let me feel it for a moment, like everybody else already has, and then move forward.
Right. Yeah. Because you wonder if it's the days later when you're spiraling, um, then, well, and I think of a domestic violence situation too, or a manipulation or gaslighting or things, and you don't quite realize what's happening.
Yes.
And then later you go, wait a minute, that was not appropriate, or that was not right, or what is happening here? And you start really recognizing what's going on. Um, so in that situation, it could be starting to write, starting to get it out of your system. Because what happens too, if it's like been a few days, then other people can think, oh, the conversation's over, the argument is over, everything is fine now. But
Yes.
you're still like, wait a minute, no. That's
I just realized that was rude. Can we
right.
now? Yes, I have so done that.
Yeah. And so I think writing letters to the person and really working to build an internal strength. So potentially it could happen in the moment, or it's totally okay to say 2 days after the fight, the disagreement, to say, I'm not done yet. Let's talk again,
Yep. Yep.
appropriately in an assertive way.
Well, and typically there was, at least in my situation, there usually was no argument to begin with because I would have not made a confrontation in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
They would have said their piece, and then it would slowly start to resonate in my mind of what really happened. And so I was a doormat for a couple days, and now I'm like, nope, I'm up knocking because it's not
Right.
okay.
Right. And so I think that it's okay to go back knocking now that you've had time to digest it.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, this was a good one. Number 2. I think that this is where a lot of people live. Rushing nowhere. You get an idea and feel like it has to be done right now. You're rushing around to do the things at the faster pace, and this feeling of doom that if you don't get it done, something bad's going to happen, or you're putting all this pressure on yourself that's not necessarily real. You're just kind of in this chronic stress mode.
Yep. The best way that I could describe that too is when I was in that chronic stress mode, I didn't see a future. And so if an idea came, it needed to be done now, fully, completely, let's get it done. Or, if a thought or a concern, I needed to get it done now because tomorrow was not necessarily a for sure. I think that's why I respond that way. I don't know, I guess. But I do. I get like this heightened anxiety and my head spins and I have to do something now.
Right. What do you do when you start to feel that today?
I haven't thought that far. Um, Honestly, I don't know that I do it as much now as I used to. I will say that in the past, when I was really in that chronic stress spot, there would be a lot of um, down, like depressed, don't want to move type feeling. And then all of a sudden, I have a burst of energy. I have to do this. I have to do that within like right now. And then I would be back for a few days of just feeling like blah. So I don't feel like I'm in that as much.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting to think if I have energy, I need to utilize it to the best of my ability because I don't know how long this will last.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So consistency is good. The up and down can be intense.
Yeah. I remember there would be times when I would have a flashback and I would need to tell somebody like now. And often, like Granny was my person that I would often tell things to. And um, it, by golly, she had a life outside of my flashback world. And so I eventually got to where I've learned I can wait, like I can sit, I can process, I can whatever. It doesn't need to be done right this second. The house is not on fire. It may feel like it, but it's not.
Right. So then utilizing your coping skills, your positive coping skills to bring the anxiety down in the midst of heightened anxiety. Because I would say that's probably what it is.
Yeah.
It's this rushing anxiety of this needs to be done, or like you've had a couple days on the couch with the depression and now I've got energy and so I've got to clean or whatever the case may be. But taking those deep breaths, journaling, and realizing you have other options, because the goal is consistency and,
Yes.
the stability.
Yeah. Not a roller coaster ride.
Not a roller coaster. But I think a lot of people live in chronic stress. If you think of the average American who's working full time with kids at home, I think most people feel like I don't have time to do anything I want to do because I'm doing all these things everybody else wants me to do all the time.
Yes.
And it's not a fun place to be.
Yeah.
I would say this is probably what 90 Day U-Turn, one of the benefits of 90 Day U-Turn is helping people go from this chronic stress, fight or flight, into rest and digest, time management, being intentional and really thoughtful about how you're spending your time, making sure you are having positive coping skills embedded into your day regularly so that you stay sane, that kind of stuff.
100%. Yeah. So, side note, you and I are starting our Stop SIS 90 Day U-Turn tonight. And so I was listening, of course, to week one. And yes, oh, it's so good. Anybody who's not done 90 Day, I highly, highly recommend it. It's just powerful information and in a loving way. I love it.
Yeah, a loving kick in the right direction, we call it. This one's good too. Okay, so number 3. Refrigerator buzz depression. So I'll read through it and then you can let me know what you can expand on it. So all of a sudden recognizing your refrigerator has a buzz and wondering if it's been like that for years. Recognizing depression and realizing it's been there for years unnoticed. Friends point out your dark thoughts and depression and how it's unusual for someone to have those as often as you do. Tell me more about what this means.
Okay, so my understanding of this is like the example of the refrigerator buzz is somebody comes into your house and they're like, "What is that noise?" And you're like, "You don't even hear it anymore. You don't even realize that your refrigerator has a buzz because you've gotten so used to it." In the same way, you've gotten so used to the dark thoughts, the spiraling of your life at times that you don't recognize it as being something different from other people. And then sometimes when you voice something, even something small, and the person's like, "Wait, what? You really have those thoughts?" Like it's like, wait, nobody else does? This is just me? What's going on? So it's that recognition of, okay, or even just the depression, like you starting to feel down and you're realizing I've probably had this since I was in junior high and never really recognized what was going on.
It is fascinating how we don't know how good we can feel until we feel good, because we will justify feeling bad. We will make excuses. We'll think everything's fine. I have a silly example of this is when I was in grad school, because I had chronic stress. I mean, I was living in chronic stress. So I remember being like, I have all this homework to do and I have to run 3 miles and I have to do this and I have to do that. And my husband was like, who said? I did. I said that.
Yeah.
But I remember I used to have these visions on the way to work about hitting a tree or hitting a deer and going to the hospital. And I remember telling like my class some of this stuff, and they're like, that's really interesting. What is that about? And I think it was about the fact that I just wanted a break. And I felt like if I was at the hospital, I wanted a break. I didn't want to hurt myself. I just wanted time out.
Yeah.
And I wanted a good reason for it. And so once I recognized that normal people don't think like that, I started saying, all right, well, if I want a break, how else can I give myself a break? Like what is really going on? But again, I didn't realize that was abnormal. I thought everyone thought that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yep. That was your refrigerator buzz. It's a different name, but you get the point.
Yeah. So how does somebody recognize this if they think that everything's fine or they don't quite realize that what they're thinking or how they're behaving isn't as healthy as it could be?
This is the detriment of suffering in silence. You don't know until you speak it out loud and share it with somebody. Like even sharing your story. I've had so many survivors who have, for the first time, shared with me their story, thinking in their mind it was their fault, or it really wasn't that big of a deal. And then being able to see somebody's reaction and hear, no, that's a huge deal. What you went through is not okay. That changes everything. It changes the narrative in your mind.
Yeah. So having relationships where you can say stuff like that and get feedback in a loving way.
Yep. And so I guess it's getting past that embarrassment of saying something, not knowing how the other person's going to respond. But that's the best way to know and not just spiral in your own brain, but to get it out and hear outside thoughts on it.
Yeah. Ooh, all right. Number 4, being tired is a trigger. We confuse our body's natural desire to be tired for depression or failing. They can become addicted to productivity, a feeling of we might be abandoned if we aren't energized and happy.
Yeah. So I could also say, for me, being tired is a trigger, but being sick is also a trigger. So it's so hard, like the connection between what your body is feeling and what your mind is comprehending is sometimes not always a good flow, especially since for years my body kept the score, but my mind wasn't remembering. And so I think there's times when I feel tired that it leads me into feeling like a panic. Oh no, here I go again. I'm falling back into this pit. I'm not going to be able to get back out. And really, it's okay to be tired. It's okay to have had a long day and you rest. And so, but it can be a trigger. Also, I worry about other people's response to my tiredness. They're not going to want to be around me. Or if I'm, down, they're not going to want to be around me. This is going to be terrible. Like, I don't want to burden them. I think way too much.
I'm sure that's one of these that we'll get to, overthinking.
If
But
not,
it is
it should be
interesting to
number
think
12.
of your body is feeling tired, your body needs a break, but your brain goes, oh no, I can't take a break because if I do, I won't come back out.
Yes.
And that's the fear.
Yep.
So how do you navigate that?
I think one big thing is the community once again, like when you're hearing other people taking breaks and taking care of themselves and self-love, and that helps you kind of think, okay, maybe I just can do that too in a normal way. That is normal.
Right.
But when it's just you and your mind cycling through things, fear is what speaks the loudest.
Yeah. And I would say give yourself a timer, maybe like a 20-minute nap.
You've told me that before.
20-minute nap or, an hour of journaling or, vegging, and then, give yourself a deadline. So that way you can give your body a break, your mind a break. And then you have a plan for how you're not going to stay there.
I think also this is super important for trauma survivors to hear. PTSD and trauma and all of the effects of trauma and what your body and mind are going through is exhausting. Like the days when I would get hardly anything done around the house, but we're fighting some of my, hardest flashbacks or whatever, like that's work. It's exhausting. And acknowledging that and giving yourself grace and maybe even explaining that to the people you live with. Like, I know I didn't help out much around the house today, but this is where my head is. This is the battle I'm fighting, and it's exhausting. And I think helping other people understand that is powerful too.
Well, because we also know it's not helpful to fight through the flashbacks and plow through them. You really do want to stop and write it all down and move through it, right?
Yes, exactly.
So would you also say to somebody that maybe is experiencing a flashback or experiencing that tiredness that it's not going to, it's going to end?
Oh, 100%. And that was one of the things I would have to speak truth into myself whenever I was in one of the flashbacks or just a stuck period. I've gone through this before and I've gotten out to the other side, and that's what will happen this time. I will not be stuck in this forever.
Yeah. I've heard that from some of the survivors. They're afraid to really go there because they don't know what will happen or if they can handle it or if it will get better or it feels like flashbacks are just coming and coming. And can I really, like, will this ever end? And the answer is yes, it will. Like, there is another side and you're not staying trapped in that cycle forever.
Mm-hmm.
But the more
But
that you can move through it, the better.
it's just so much easier said than done.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, when you have a flashback, and this isn't even, I don't know, this probably isn't what we're even talking about, but when you have a flashback and you know you have to walk through it, in many ways, you're having to say, okay, I'm going to be raped right, in the next, it's like you have to accept it. And that's the opposite of what your body and mind want to do. And it's a terrible, terrible feeling, but you have to relive it to process it and get it to the other side of your brain. But to say yes to that, nobody in their right mind wants to do that.
Yeah. But we also know the effects of not doing that.
Exactly.
Which is stuffing it down and drowning.
Exactly. Yes. And as you always say, if it was easy, we would have already done it and been through it. So it's definitely not easy. And I fight it just like anybody else. But whenever I do finally release it, like let it come and then release it, I am 1,000 times better on the other side.
So it's listening to your body,
Mm-hmm.
acknowledging what you're experiencing and feeling. Know that it's okay to rest. It's okay to go through the flashbacks. It's important. But then maybe calling in the community for support or giving yourself a deadline so you feel confident that it's not going to last forever.
Yes. Yeah, that's great.
All right. Number 5. Chameleon, but don't mix. Certain friends can't know about certain friends. There is no authentic sense of self, so we take on a whole bunch of personas. The added layer here is that we don't want to mix our friend groups. Typically, it's from a childhood where you can't let people know what's going on at home or growing up in 2 different worlds.
Yeah. I don't feel like I do this anymore, but I definitely did. Even, I mean, into my adult years, 100%. Because I would have those who I felt comfortable being more myself and those that it was not safe to be myself. And so in my mind, it was not safe then to let those two groups mix. And I did. I was a chameleon in some ways with the people that I didn't feel safe enough to say things to, um, just to keep the peace and make everything feel better for everybody because I hate confrontation or I hate it. But at the same time, it it was exhausting. And so and didn't make sense. But to me that was safety.
Yeah. And I think you do what you need to do in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to resolve this or move through it, I feel like there's several ways, right? But it seems like as you grow your sense of self, the other things kind of fall into place.
So once I started to be true to who I am, true to my story with the group that I was afraid to let know, um, the response was not what I had hoped, but it gave me a blank slate in a sense of this is who I am, take it or leave it. And I no longer had to play in 2 different worlds. This is just who I am.
Yeah.
And it's been hard because you lose people, but yeah.
So there's a give and take. But you think the being your authentic self would also release some of the anxiety of trying to live up to other people's expectations.
Yeah. I mean, the truth sets you free
Always.
always. So even if, and that was the thing, to me, it was a safety thing. It was a protection. I can't speak my truth because it's not going to be received in a way that I can emotionally handle. And so I put those walls up. But ultimately, when I did speak my truth, the walls came down and I was set free. It wasn't the other way around.
Yeah. And again, it's almost always worse in our brain than it is in real life. And so it can be like when you think of the expectations you think people have of you,
Yes.
sometimes it's just not even true.
Yeah. Yeah. You've read the situation totally wrong.
Right.
Is that on here? It should be, because I do read situations wrong as well.
We'll add it as number 12 if need be.
Yes. Okay.
All right. Number 6, on the spot disassociation. So being put on the spot with a question or attention can feel scary or threatening. And so they leave their body. Shame is a big part of this. People looking at them brings insecurities, not wanting pictures, or someone is okay with questions and attention until they are asked to talk about or express unwanted emotions or information. Then they're like, see you later. I'm out here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this one, I obviously dissociate, but for me, I feel like there's two different ways that I relate to number 6. Number one, I don't necessarily disassociate when given attention, but what I do have a tendency to do is um, try to act like everything's good, like put on a show of I'm doing great. Like look, when maybe that's not the truth.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in that spot as much anymore, but I used to be really bad. Like if eyes were on me, I want to act like I have it all together, even though I don't. But then when asked particular questions related to what's going on the inside, yeah, I was not there. That was not going
So
to be a
would,
thing.
for somebody that might not quite know what dissociation is all about, would you say you would just give automatic responses and your brain was just kind of like not even participating?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like your body was there, but really, as quickly as possible, you were hoping the conversation would change because,
Right.
yeah.
Well, and we noticed this in 90-day U-turn as well, right? We're on Zoom, we have our cameras up, we are talking, we've got a topic and, people chat. And so we have created a system. So like the goal is that people who want to talk can share and the people that don't, and nobody feels picked on or called on or that kind of thing. And so there's a system that we've created where you can raise your hand with the little emojis, or we just go around in a circle so everybody knows what to expect.
Yeah.
And we found that when people know what to expect, then that can really calm the nerves even in the group setting.
Exactly. I mean, it doesn't make it necessarily comfortable, but they're able to get through it and then feel stronger in the end because they did.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why we do breakouts as well. So everybody gets a chance to talk to one person. They don't have to share with the main group all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's powerful.
All right. Number 7, laughing about the pain.
Yeah.
So this is when you're joking about the abuse that happened in a casual or funny way. The survivor isn't either fully connected to the severity of what they're talking about, or they're laughing to avoid the heavy emotions they don't want to feel, or to keep others from feeling those heavy emotions.
Yeah. And I mean, in some ways, it's how you lie to yourself. And if you can make a joke out of something awful that happened to you, it sits better than living in the reality of that's abuse. Giving the right words to it or the right emotions to it is sometimes heavier than we can handle in the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen this in 90 days. Well,
Yeah. It's a coping mechanism. I mean, and
it
it's
is.
not right or wrong. It's needed in the moment because it is
Mhm.
hard stuff. And so, it is the way it goes. And then at some point, we also get to the place where we say, yeah, that sucks.
Exactly. Yeah. But it is interesting to look back and just remember. Well, even shoot, when I talk to survivors nowadays, we'll still start laughing about our mind and just some of the things. But it's like it helps you cope. It helps in the community as well
Yeah.
with things. So
We do have a lot of fun laughing about some of the hard stuff.
Yeah.
Little inside jokes. I think the biggest thing is if it's all or nothing. Like if it's never seriously talked about and only laughed at, then
Yeah.
that's a problem.
Yeah.
But if you can't create some sort of energy around it that's not always super heavy, I
Yeah.
think there's a need for both, but it's the all or nothing that usually can get us into trouble.
Yeah. That makes sense.
All right. 8, crying valve. Can't start or can't stop. The goal is to be somewhere in the middle. Both extremes, crying too much or not at all, doesn't process the grief.
I didn't know that. I didn't. So, like, okay, now I was definitely, when I was in the midst of the chaos, there was no crying, there was no emotion. Like, I was a shell of a person. When I first told Granny what was going on, I stared off in space from what I can remember and like zero emotions. And then came a period where it was like that valve got turned on and like all these emotions, it was making up for lost time, tears like flowing. And from like what I had thought was that's healing. Like I needed it, which I probably did, but I didn't realize that the too much crying can actually keep you from processing the grief.
I was talking to a lady in the coaching my certification program yesterday, and she's a nurse, like a surgery supervisor lead. I don't know, but she basically manages other people in this part of the hospital. And she said there was one girl who she worked with for 2 years who was in and out of harming herself, who was just kind of always in crisis. And she supported her. She gave her days off. She drove her to the counseling. And at some point she just said, this is not helping anymore. So I'm going to not enable you anymore. And so guess what that girl did? Instead of leaning on her, she started leaning on all these other people.
Mm-hmm.
So what that makes me think of is sometimes the emotion, the crying can become the habit and the way to get attention, but you're really living in victim mode. You're not actually healing.
Yeah.
And I think that's the all or nothing piece. Like if you're always in that, like, always in tearful, everything is upsetting, that kind of thing, then that's keeping you stuck because you're not able to process and move forward.
Yeah. So help me process, like, so for example, it, something heavy comes at me and now I do cry almost instantly when I'm trying to discuss it or whatever. That part's healthy. If it is a,
Yeah, it's the length. It's the
I gotcha.
yeah, it's the like for this girl, she didn't from what I was hearing yesterday, it was like she didn't really want to change or want help. She just, when somebody wasn't giving her the attention she wanted, she just found somebody else.
Yeah.
And the tears about everything kept happening.
Right. Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's like you go and call Granny and she's like, okay, enough, get over it. So then you go call someone else and you're like, and again, there's a piece of it where we want to talk about it and you do need to cry. And we've talked about survivors who are going through something hard and it does suck and you need that moment.
Yes.
And then at some point, whether it's a day or 3 days, like at some point you go, now what? What can I control? What action can I take? Because nobody's ever fully stuck and it can feel like we are,
Right.
but we always have options. We just kind of have to take a step back and really look at the big picture,
Oh yeah, perspective is huge. It really is. But I will say there are times when I don't fully comprehend the severity of a situation, but then there are other times I don't fully comprehend that it's not as severe as what it feels like in my mind. So talking about it and getting a sense of other people's responses helps me navigate my emotions with it. I think I'm doing better at navigating it on my own, but not 100%. I can make a mountain out of a molehill without realizing it. But then I can also have a mountain and think it's a molehill, and that's not good either. So,
Yes, this gray area is where we all live, right? We all need to live the extreme. So again, it's not saying that crying is bad. It's
Right.
just saying if you're living there, that's the problem. Because at
Yeah.
some point, there has to be a place where you say, okay, now what? What can I control? What are my options?
Yep. It's taking your power back.
Yeah, for sure. But you're right. A season for letting it all go, man. We've got to. We've
Hmm.
got to. Like that's a season to be honored. Just know, like, I think there's two extremes there, right? One is if you don't want to go into that season and so you hold everything in because you're afraid to let it go because you don't know how long it's going to last and you don't want to, fall into a depression or whatever. So you hold it on.
Right.
It's okay to let it go and it's okay to have those moments of crying and it's okay to even cry for days.
Yeah.
At some point, though, right? Then we want to say, all right, now what?
I think a great example is, and I'll be vague because she's one of our survivors, but she came to us well, maybe a month ago, and I mean, it was tears upon tears upon tears about a situation that was going on in her life. And it was like a crisis moment. Like she didn't even know if she wanted to be alive in that moment. Like it was bad. And we were on the phone with her. And when I would see her over the course of the next few days, it was still her saying, I've cried all day and I can't stop crying. And then she's like, I want to do 90-day U-turn. I want to do reflecting ownership. It was like she did have she probably had 3-4 days, maybe even a week of just full out, this sucks. But then she picked herself up and she saw what things she needed to do to get out of that spot. And she started making plans. And she still cries, but she has made the plans to move forward and is actively doing something.
Yeah. It's getting into growth mindset. And
Yeah.
growth mindset says everything is learnable and I can change.
Hmm.
And when we're in the midst of the emotion, it's hard to see that. But if we can step over that line and go, nothing, like everything will change. Like things are always changing, right? I'm not going to stay in the sucky situation forever.
Right.
The sun will come up in the morning and having trust in that.
Yeah.
All right, number 9. This one's fascinating to me. Okay, glass frog. They can see me. They can all see through me.
Yeah. Sorry.
Similar to imposter syndrome, feeling like everybody knows all your dirty laundry, truth about your, yes. Okay. Yeah. And the truth of who you are. I've heard people, and I've heard you say this
Hmm.
after experiences, you would walk into church and feel like everybody knew.
Uh-huh. Yep. I literally thought the word dirty was written on my forehead.
Mm-hmm.
Like that you just feel like everybody knows the truth of who you are.
Like the scarlet letter, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
It also says children think adults are omnipotent, so they assume they will all know what's going on just by looking at you, and
Mm-hmm.
that the inner child feeling follows us into adulthood. There's also hypervigilance. Abused kids have to learn how to be sneaky growing up in order to keep what's really happening a secret, even if it's done subconsciously. That sneaking feeling might be something that you've had to do your whole life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean, I have felt this. And even I don't think I do as much. Um, but I mean, I definitely can relate when I was in the muck of it all. I walking into a place, I assumed eyes were on me because they knew. And
So
I
there's
don't
two
know.
parts to this story too, right? Everybody knows, and then because you think they know, well, you think you don't need to tell them.
Exactly.
And then you're like, why is nobody doing anything?
And it's because you don't have enough worth for them to do anything. That's the mindset you have.
Sheesh. Okay.
Yeah. So as a kid, I mean, imagine you assume everybody knows. Let's say there's a kid who's being physically beaten at home, and you think your teachers know everything. You think, I mean, you just view adults in that way, and yet nobody's doing anything. So what's that say about me?
Heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Like it breaks my heart to think of kids walking around with that type of weight on their shoulders and in their heart.
Yeah.
And then hypervigilant is, and I think about this with addiction. A lot of times with addiction, you don't know if somebody's going to come home mad, happy, be happy, and then turn mad. You know, that's addicts often are the ones that are abusive and or rage off the handle, you know. And so kids learn to watch their surroundings. Is anything out of place? I'm going to make sure XYZ happens so dad doesn't get mad. And then they become responsible for dad's anger, right?
Yep.
And so then they take on, this is codependence, they take on the emotion of dad, because if dad's mad, it's my fault and I should do something. And then that's what domestic violence is all about, as well as codependence. And so, I mean, it's just an exhausting way to live.
Yeah. I mean, you literally feel like you have the button that can send them off or make them happy.
That's a lot of pressure.
It is.
And you know what that does? This is what gets me all riled up, is that abuser or the addict or the rager or the whoever is not taking responsibility for their actions.
Right.
And they can't if addicts live in a different world, you guys. So if you've lived with addicts before, you know, they say the sky is black, you say the sky is blue, like you live in different worlds. Can't convince them of something. You just get the heck out of there if you can. But what happens if they're not taking responsibility? Then they are gaslighting you into believing that it's your fault. And so the spiral just continues.
Yeah. And it makes it to where the child cannot even think about themselves.
Right.
Because they're constantly looking around them on how they can control the situation to keep themselves safe.
So then when we ask you what color, it's your favorite color. Like,
you haven't had a chance to think about that.
Yeah. What do you do for fun? What? These are all questions to ask kids to help build their inner strength. And it seems so simple, but it truly is profound.
It is. And asking these questions can lead us to possibly seeing if there's something going on or has gone on in the past that they haven't gotten out, that maybe they think we should know and we don't, or think we should have seen and we didn't.
So tell me, what about the sneaking feeling?
To me, it would. So I always felt like, I guess it was just kind of keeping my two worlds separate and trying to make sure that they didn't mix. I don't know.
Well, and I think if you're trying to keep a secret,
yeah,
if you're keeping a secret, that builds on each other, you know, and, you know, if you're saying you're going somewhere, or, I mean, you can imagine you go to a party and get hurt and come home and now you're sneaking, pretending like everything's fine. That secret feeling eats away.
Mm-hmm. And it becomes a way of life. And you've lost completely who you are.
Yeah.
You're wearing a mask.
Yeah. 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 You're wearing a mask because you can't even imagine saying the truth.
Yep.
All right. 10, sideways, grief or rage. Getting emotional over small things as opposed to the bigger things that you're disconnected from. There is a reserve of tears and grief that comes out sideways on something that isn't really the root of the pain when we get triggered.
Yep. Like, okay, so for example, this could be, my main abuser growing up was my basketball coach. And going to a basketball game, I am usually, unfortunately, hyper aware of the coaches and their interaction with their players. And if I see something that feels similar to what I went through just within body language wise, that's going to send this sideways, like I could fall apart. And it doesn't even make sense to anybody sitting around me why I'm falling apart. And I guess in a sense, it's like a trigger, but I'm not being hurt. My coach is not in front of me, but yet it's all coming back as if it is.
Mm-hmm. It also reminds me too, when I led anger management groups, we talk about the volcano and you explode.
Mm,
And if you're living at an 8, a paper cut could make you freak out.
exactly.
Or, they say the kick the dog syndrome, where you're mad at your boss, but you come home and kick the dog. Like,
Yeah.
you're not actually addressing the real problem. All of these emotions are coming out in things that aren't necessarily big deals, but it's because you're living with these secrets, you're, boiling up, you're living
Mhm.
at this H stress level, and it doesn't take much for you to explode.
Yeah, I've noticed if I don't make my husband aware that I'm in a flashback, but just continue to try to push through,
Yeah.
I will get so frustrated at everybody in the house, and they don't know why. They
Yeah.
haven't done anything. I'm just overwhelmed.
Yes. Yeah. My husband and I were talking the other day, and he's like, my goal is to be over honest,
Hmm.
because if I even just omission, don't say something, right? That can be a secret.
Yes.
And he's like, my goal is to be over honest. And I think that that's, especially within relationships, right? A good place to live,
Yeah.
because we can handle real and honest, but we can't handle secrets and masks.
Exactly.
All right. 11, waiting games. This is a good one. I will do X after Y takes place. This is a mood dependent behavior. It's a game we play with ourselves and is evident of living as our inner child who is accustomed to believing the things that will get better on its own. So, yeah, this is classic.
Mhm.
When I feel better, then all these external things will happen. Or when these external things happen, then I'll feel better.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a cycle. And like I mean, I remember trying to contemplate do I rest because I'm tired, or do I get up and do something because I know it's the right thing to do, um, instead of waiting on the feeling better to do it. But yeah, like oftentimes, even like the 90-day U-turn, saying yes to that. We've had so many women say, well, when this changes, I'll say yes to 90-day. Like when my schedule's less hectic or when I have less stress in my life, then I'll do it.
Yeah.
And nothing changes.
And nothing changes. Yeah. So what we've learned is that change start as you build inner strength, everything on the outside changes, right? And then there are times when you have to take action first. Like, how many times do we not really feel like working out, but once we're there, we're glad we are, right? I've never said, man, I wish I didn't work out. So there's times when we take action first. I think what happens is we delay life and we say, when this is, then I'll get to living. I remember being in college and saying, when I'm finally in the working world, then I'll be able to blah, 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 blah. Or we'd say, when this happens, then I'll do God's plan. The reality is God's plan is moving all the time. Our job is to like insert ourselves into what's already happening. Our job is to live today, not push it off into tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. I even heard my son literally this morning. I'm trying to remember what it was exactly that he said, but it was like, I think it was he wants to make the baseball team for junior high. When I make the baseball team, then I'll be happy. Well,
Yeah.
we can be happy now and then. Like
Yeah.
it's not dependent.
Right. You're awesome either way.
Hmm.
My favorite is my son, who's like, when I make the basketball team, then I'll start to practice. You're like,
Oh,
no,
yes.
no, 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 no. You practice now. That is how you make the basketball team.
Oh,
But
that's
I think
cute.
we do. We have what we want, but we don't feel confident enough to actually go for it. And so we put all of these excuses in the way, thinking that at some magical point we'll feel ready.
So is this a part of self-sabotage?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because the reality is you will never feel ready.
Well, yeah. And if you have the mindset of I everything just bad keeps happening and that's why I can't get better because,
Right.
that's it's not going to work for you.
Right. Right. God calls the or qualifies the called, right?
Yes.
He doesn't call the qualified. And so I've learned that you gain that inner strength and that confidence through the action. But so often we say, well, or we'll bump up against something. I had somebody do this week. She was like, oh my gosh, I missed this email. It must be a sign I'm not supposed to do it. You're like, no, just missed the email. It's not a sign.
No.
Because
Huh.
or like they'll start their business and they'll hear a no and they're like, well, this means I'm not good at this. Or they'll join 90-day U-turn and have a life upset and it's like, oh, this is too much stress. No, this is called life. And the
Mm-hmm.
goal is to move through these things without being derailed. um,
Yes.
and so if what you want is on the other side of this hurdle, then let's go for it.
Yeah.
But we don't need to make like all of these things mean something that they don't.
Yeah. That makes sense.
You know,
That's it. That's the 11 things. I think there could be more, but
what
we'll
was
stop.
the 12th one you suggested?
Well, there was the
Overthinking.
overthinking. That's one.
I
Um,
really liked the reel that you did recently where you were like, you hear the like a text that says yes or something, and you're like, are they mad at me?
yeah, no, it wasn't my text message, let me first say, but it could have been probably. But you message somebody and say, "Are you up?" And they say yes. And then you say, "Are you mad?" "No." "Why?" "Your yes sounded angry."
I think that
Yeah.
could be one too.
Well, I don't know what word we could give that or what title, but yeah, that's a thing. I definitely, and that's trying to read the room. That's trying to be a chameleon in a sense still, and making sure whatever I say next will keep you happy.
Right.
That makes me mad. That would make Granny mad to hear right now. She probably just made the same noise I just did. Yes, I have no doubt, because it is not our job to make people happy.
Right.
That's not why we're
I'm going
here.
to take care of my 6 feet. You take care of yours. You are not responsible for my happiness. I am not responsible for yours. If you can support me in a way, then I'll ask for it. Right?
Hmm.
Or if I can support you, ask me, and we would support each other in our growth and joy, but we're not responsible. And I think taking ownership of your happiness and then letting other people take control of themselves, that's freedom.
Oh, yes, because nobody can make you mad. Nobody can make you happy. That's all within your control.
Well, I learned in counseling, right, not to ask the question, how did that make you feel?
Oh,
I learned to ask the question, how do you feel about that?
there you go.
Another way to say is, what meaning did you make of that?
Yeah,
What did that mean to you?
yeah,
Because you're right. It's people don't have, can't, they do often, right? Nobody's perfect, but we don't want them to have that much power.
right. Yeah,
And if they can do something that riles us all up, then they have a power.
yeah, and that's scary. They have
And
an ownership in a sense.
yeah, I think we all can benefit from reading Reflecting Ownership.
Reflecting ownership.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think we all have emotional tethers to situations that we get to heal from. Yay for us.
Yeah. Amen.
All right. Well, it says my internet is unstable. Did I blank out a minute?
Yeah, you did. That's why I had the awkward
I
smile.
thought.
Yep.
All right. Well, is there anything you want to add? Oh, we're going to put this document on the website. So if
Yes.
you guys want to go to stopsuffering.org, you can download this free resource and check it out yourself. Check mark the ones that you feel like you fall into. And again, this is a no judgment zone. This is just interesting information, because the more you know about yourself and the more you can say, all right, this is a symptom from what I have experienced in the past, I can learn new habits. I can learn a new response. I can build that inner strength. Like nobody's stuck.
Exactly. It's normalizing the healing journey.
Amen. That's awesome. All right. I'm going to pick an I declare to end with.
Yeah.
Ooh, this one's good. Okay. I declare that I live as a healer. I am sensitive to the needs around me. I lift the fallen, restore the broken, and encourage the discouraged. I am full of compassion and kindness. I won't just look for the miracle. I will become someone's miracle by showing God's love and mercy everywhere I go. This is my declaration, and this is my declaration for you. Have an awesome day, you guys, and we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to this powerful episode of Stop Suffering in Silence. If you are interested in booking Rachel to speak at your school, your church, or on your podcast, then please email openblindeyes@protonmail.com. If you are interested in sponsoring a survivor on their healing journey and would like to donate to Stop SIS, then please check out the link in the description box or show notes below, or you can email stopsis@protonmail.com. And finally, if you are currently suffering in silence, or you know somebody who is, whether they're dealing with a current trauma or one from the past, then we will always recommend that you reach out to your local resources and find a counselor that you can trust, because nobody is meant to suffer alone. Have an amazing week, and thank you for being here.